What's up guys, it's Chili. I make fan concepts for Age of Empires 4. Japan was recently announced as the latest civ to be added to the AOE4 roster, as part of the new Sultan's Ascent DLC. I literally cannot wait. So today I'm going to be doing a video deep dive for the concept that I made on how I'd like to see Japan added to the game. All of my concepts are available on my website, the link is in the description below. Without further ado, let's get into it. How I would design the Japanese in Age of Empires 4. Japan has been a mainstay in the Age of Empires series. We've been seeing it all the way back since Age of Empires 1. Back then, they were known as the Yamato, named after the Yamato period of classical Japan. This was a time before samurai were ever really a thing, and reflecting this, Yamato faction is mostly focused on cavalry and archery, which makes sense considering the importance of horse archery in early Japanese warfare. In Age of Empires 2, we finally look into Japan's medieval period. This is from the end of the Asuka period into the Sengoku Jidai Warring States period. This time Japan's known for their infantry. Samurai are their unique unit, and it serves as one of the fastest attacking units in the game. Age of Empires 3 picks up where AOE2 left off, depicting Japan from the Sengoku Jidai all the way up through the Meiji Restoration. This is the time period when Japan was rapidly industrializing, trying to catch up with the modern world. Japan in this game was known for powerful, high quality, but expensive units, and legit like all of their units were the best version of that unit type. It was insane. To be honest, Japan had so much overpowered shit going on for them that it really felt like there must have been some weebs pulling some strings in the back. Japan was actually released next to China, India, all in one expansion together, but China was basically portrayed as human wave tactics the video game, while all India had was elephants and a sepia filter. India actually got done extra dirty. In a game about the Age of Sail, they didn't actually give India any unique naval units, instead just copied and pasted British ships. Anyways, back to Japan. In my concept for Japan, I'll be covering the period from 794 CE, which is the beginning of the Heian period, up until 1603 CE, a year that traditionally marks the end of the Sengoku Jidai and the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate. Through this time period, Japan went through a ton of changes, from the rise of the samurai class, to defending against the invading Mongolians, until finally the massive all-out civil war known as the Warring States period, the Sengoku Jidai. This is the period where all your famous stories about samurai and ninja come from. The reason why it's a 3-star difficulty civ is because if you look into the history of Japan, they just didn't have what a lot of other civilizations on the mainland had. They're just built different. It makes sense, they're pretty much as east goes, on an isolated island far from the major shipping lanes. Japan didn't have heavy cavalry, they didn't really use shields all that much, and while they had crossbows, they also didn't use those either. In the context of AOE4, where every faction has heavy cavalry, heavy infantry with shields, and crossbowmen, Japan's gonna be a bit of an outlier. I had to get creative and come up with something that would work out. Enter the Shogun. In history, the Shogun served as kind of like the military dictator, not technically the head of state. That privilege was reserved for the emperor, but in every way but name, the Shogun was the one running the show. In AOE3, the Shogun is a tanky cavalry hero that functions as a mobile barracks. But it's not just a mobile barracks, no. This motherfucker can sneak into the back of your base and spawn 10 more Tori out of his fucking body, instantly destroy all your econ, and then run away before you can even do anything. Fuck that.
Okay.
I don't think Calvin's realized.
Nope. There should be alarm bells going off.
No, in this concept, the Shogun is going to have a much more reasonable role. You only get one, and he can be trained from the town center starting in Age 2. He has the ability to erect a banner to buff all nearby allied units, and there's different banners he can choose from. Bonus to light units in Age 2, bonus to armored units in Age 3, or bonus to structures and siege units in Age 4. So you can think of him as kind of like a cross between an Ottoman Metter and the Mongol Kurultai. Japanese players will have to be strategic with which banner they choose and where to position it, as it takes time to set up and tear down and change its position. His ability to grant bonus damage versus armored units in the Castle Age is really what gives Japan a very effective answer to armor. So playing both as Japan or against Japan is going to be an extremely unique experience. Speaking of unique experiences, Japan will have a unique structure in the form of the shrine. If you visit Japan today, your girlfriend will likely make you take some Instagram photos of her with some deer and some red pillars. Those are Shinto shrines. Shintoism was the native religion of Japan before the spread of Buddhism. It's a nature-worshipping type of religion. It believes in harmony with nature spirits. In AOE3, Japan couldn't hunt deer and instead built shrines that would trickle resources based on the number of deer near them. I've always been a fan of this mechanic, and so my shrines also trickle resources, but this time it's based on what's nearby. So if you build a shrine near a wood line, you'll get a trickle of wood. If you build it on a gold pit, you'll get some gold. You get it? This is also reminiscent of the torps from Sweden in AOE3, but I imagine the trickle rate will be much slower because that shit was OP. Just like roost hunting cabins, shrines can't be placed too close to each other, or else they'll negate each other, so you have to space them out. I should also note that shrines replace Japan's houses as well, and they cost 100 wood apiece. So for Japan, it'll be a pain in the ass to get their population space going, but if they can successfully get their shrines up, they'll get a ton of free resources. Shrines also have an influence mechanic. They'll provide the Bushido influence.
The way of the warrior. That is Bushido.
Bushido means the path of the warrior. It's a warrior code that's analogous to what European knights have for chivalry. Military production buildings within the Bushido's influence will chain influence, and any units produced will have increased attack speed. And remember, the Shogun's ability to grant bonus damage means Japan really likes having more attack speed. Their next trait, warrior caste, refers to the samurai social class. That's right, samurai weren't just the warriors of medieval Japan, they were also the landlords. In medieval Japanese society, everything was centered on the cultivation of rice. The warrior class existed both to protect those fields and to tax them. What this means in game is that all Japanese units will have higher base stats, but this also comes at having a higher base cost. This includes basic units like spearmen and archers. Japan will tend to have a higher quality army than their opponents, but they'll also have difficulty massing units. Quality over quantity is the name of the game. Their last trait is called samurai horse archers. I know when you think of samurai, you're thinking about a dude on foot with a katana, but in reality, for most of Japanese history, samurai fought on horseback with a bow. They were horse archers. The Japanese will have access to a unique unit, the Yabusame, which is an armored horse archer. It's the only one of its kind in the game, and this unit will be available in the feudal age. If you remember, Yabusame were also featured in Age of Empires 3. The armored horse archer is meant to balance out the fact that Japan does not have access to armored lancers. The powerful and mobile Yabusame affords Japan a lot of map pressure early game, giving them some much needed space to help set up their shrines. Alright, next let's get into the units. Japan will get the basic spearmen. Historically, these were known as Yari Ashigaru, Yari referring to the spear they used, and Ashigaru meaning footmen. Yari Ashigaru were typically peasant levies. And then of course comes the samurai, the men-at-arms replacement. These guys are expensive and have less armor. It's worth noting that samurai armor, while cool looking, really couldn't stand up to European or even Chinese armor historically. It just wasn't as durable. But these guys do attack crazy fast, which synergizes perfectly with the Shogun's banner auras. Lastly, in the Imperial Age, I'm giving the samurai a tech called Nanban armor. Nanban translates to Southern Barbarian, which is what the Japanese would call Europeans. The Japanese largely came in contact with Europeans through trade with their southern port cities such as Nagasaki and Tanegashima. Among the imports of things like medical journals, guns, and Christianity was also European armor, and we get to see these really cool looking hybrid armors that both combine the Japanese armor aesthetic as well as the European plate cuirass. If you played Sekiro, you're probably familiar with this armor because you've seen it on this guy before. If you played Shogun 2, you might remember the Date bulletproof samurai. This tech takes inspiration from that, and it gives Japanese samurai a little bit more armor in the late game. Moving on to the archery range, Japan has the standard archer. In AOE3, the Japanese archer was called the Yumi archer, but otherwise it just functioned as a normal archer. I'm not really giving any special bonuses to this unit. The Yabusame are where things get interesting. As mentioned earlier, this is an armored horse archer available in Age 2. It's not a manga die, it can't fire while moving, but it's still a hugely powerful unit as its armor allows it to shrug off a lot of typical counters to horse archers. Like the Korean Tiger Slayer, which is also an armored archer, I've made it more vulnerable to cavalry to compensate. Asymmetrical bows refers to how Japanese bows would be much longer on the top than on the bottom. This was to give their bows the power of a longbow while still being usable on horseback. Notably, Japan will not have crossbowmen. They didn't use them historically, which might seem weird because they're right next to China and China loves their crossbows. Japan certainly knew about them, and at times they even imported them. They just didn't have the infrastructure set up to produce them en masse, and they didn't really need them to penetrate Japanese armor. The Yumi was already doing just fine. By the time armor technology was improving, however, Japan had already leapfrogged into the next weapon, the hand cannon. This is actually a pretty interesting story. A couple of Portuguese aventureiros were blown off course by a storm while traveling on a Chinese junk. They landed in Tanegashima where their lord decided to purchase a couple of their guns and try them out. He was so impressed by them that he commissioned his swordsmith to reverse engineer the guns, and before long the Tanegashima arquebus was born, and with just a few decades it was mass produced and spread all over Japan. I didn't make Japan's hand cannoneers a unique unit because I felt like this faction needed emphasis elsewhere, but I could totally see the argument for making it a unique unit as well. For the stables we got the standard horsemen, but no lancers. Lancers in Age of Empires 4 represents heavy cavalry, dudes with big lances on barded horses. Japan historically didn't have that. As I mentioned before, what cavalry Japan did have was mostly in the form of horse archers. It wasn't until the later part of the Sengoku Jidai when Takeda Shingen organized the first cavalry charge in Japanese history, and these were mostly guys on light horses with Yari spears. It just wouldn't really make sense to give Japan lancer type units. I am giving them a unique unit to compensate though, the Naginata Rider. Folks familiar with AOE3 might remember the Naginata Rider being Japan's melee cavalry unit in that game. They're a little similar here, but I'm imagining these guys as kind of like a mounted Landsknecht. Each attack attacks with AOE damage, but they're unarmored, so they're kind of a glass cannon cavalry unit. Japan's Siege Workshop is a pretty standard one. I'm not really going to go over it too much. AOE3 did feature a lot of unique Japanese siege units, but I felt like Japan has enough going for it already, and I don't really want to make them too much about their siege weapons. Maybe something like the Flaming Arrow would be cool, but this roster's already looking kind of loaded. Alright, moving on to additional units and technologies. In the Castle Age, Japan gets access to wooden keeps, which makes Japanese keeps partially cost wood instead of stone. This is based on the long history of Japan relying on wood for the building material of choice, including for their castles. The downside of this is that a lot of their keeps have since burned down. In the Imperial Age, Japanese universities will be able to research Ashigaru, which reduces the cost of all light infantry by 25%. This means that Japanese light infantry, which used to cost more than average, now costs significantly less than average. This is especially good for the hand cannoneers late game. I just want to take a moment to emphasize just how much warfare in Japan changed because of these guys. By the end of the Sengoku Jidai, everyone was massing Ashigaru, and that's because Ashigaru could be trained to use a gun within a few weeks, and they'd be able to take down a samurai that trained their whole lives. Finally, let's take a look at landmarks. AOE3 fans might find a lot of these looking familiar. First is the Torii Gate, which is also in AOE3. In this concept, it functions as a mega shrine. In particular, it trickles bonus resources from nearby wild animals. In real life, there's not just one Torii Gate, rather they're a common sight at pretty much every Shinto shrine. They represent a portal into the spirit world. Next up is the Izumo Taisha. This was a historic Shinto shrine that really had this amazing rope-looking fixture, and I just thought it looked so aesthetically badass that I had to include it. In-game, it'll function as a garrison point, and it'll spawn Sohei Guardians. Sohei were the Japanese monks who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. They famously got heavily involved in conflicts during the Warring States period. In-game, they'll function somewhat like Rus militia, but they'll spawn automatically and patrol the area, and they'll automatically aggro on any nearby enemies. They can't be controlled, but they also don't cost pop space, so this landmark really is meant to help defend an area and lock it down. As a side note, Sohei were traditionally Buddhist monks, while the Izumo Taisha is a Shinto temple, so I acknowledge that this doesn't really make the most sense. By the time of the Castle Age, Buddhism has made its way into Japan. The Great Buddha, which was also featured in AOE3, has a really unique power. Not only can it heal nearby units like the English Abbey of Kings, but it also has the ability to grant the Kensei blessing upon a unit, massively increasing that unit's combat stats. The Buddha will follow a ticket system allowing players to buff up multiple units at the same time. Kensei means sword saint and refers to individuals in history that were truly legendary sword masters. The most famous Kensei is Minamoto Musashi. He's the guy that every lone samurai archetype is based on. There's a million things to say about this guy, but I'll keep it short. The dude fought 61 duels and never lost. Not only that, but the man had the audacity to die peacefully. This guy's truly a legend. Highly recommend you look him up. The Sensoji is a beautiful Buddhist temple in Asakusa, Tokyo. If you visit Japan, this temple is a really popular tourist destination because of all the amazing street food nearby. In-game, it provides an aura that reduces both villager cost and villager training time for nearby town centers. This gives Japanese players a boom option in the mid-game, and it's also designed to encourage Japanese bases to be more tight-knit, which makes protecting their shrines that much harder, forcing Japanese players to get a little bit more creative. In the Imperial Age, Japan can build the Golden Pavilion. It's been dubbed as one of the holiest places on Earth and is a very popular tourist destination today. The version you see today, in fact, was built in the 50s. The original, as with a lot of other Japanese landmarks, was burned down. In-game, this building functions similar to the Mili and Furuma garrison, training batches of units at a discount, which is especially useful considering that Japan's units are a little bit more expensive. Additionally, it can also train shinobi. I'm envisioning shinobi to be a late game, for fun kind of unit, kind of like the Chinese grenadiers. They can rappel over walls and throw a smoke bomb to block vision, and additionally their fast movement and high siege damage will make them great at raiding and causing a ruckus. Japan's last landmark is the Edo Castle. It functions as a keep, but also has the shogun's ability to erect command banners, so you can think of this keep as a stationary second shogun. Edo Castle historically served as the seat of power for Tokugawa Ieyasu. The reason why you don't hear much about it today compared to, say, the Himeji Castle is because, well, of course, it was burned down. This time by the Americans during their firebombing campaigns in World War II. The wonder for Japan is the Todaiji. This was the wonder for Japan in AOE2 as well. When I first came across this, I wondered, why is this thing so special? Why is it a wonder? And then I realized it's fucking massive. I have no idea why they did it so big with this temple, but it looks awesome. Alright, so that wraps up my concept for Japan. In summary, Japan is a very unorthodox civilization that focuses on quality over quantity. They lack access to traditional units like the crossbowmen, lancer, and men-at-arms, so they'll need to rely on the shogun's banner to fight armored units in the Castle Age. Their houses are replaced by shrines, and they need to be spaced out in order to maximize the resources that they can generate. And finally, their powerful armored horse archers, the Yabusame, give them a lot of presence in the early game. So, what do you think? What kind of units and mechanics do you think we'll see in Japan when it drops? I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. All I know is, within a few months, we're going to see nothing but Japan mains in the ladder.